I'm so honored to spend this time with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Donald Bogle, big energy back for
Good.
us.
Good.
So, how do we get
I
started?
just want to say something before we get started. Mike is operating at a certain disadvantage. He was not who was to interview me. The interviewer is apparently delayed in traffic, and so he's the understudy who's come on, and he's just going to wing it.
All about Eve up in here.
And I think he's gonna do fine.
Oh, well, it's so easy because you know all the history, and I've said this to you before when I was in college, film school. Your first book, Tom's Coons, was out, and that was my Bible. It gave me a strong sense of responsibility in terms of understanding the shoulders that I stand upon. And now, 2019, we've got Hollywood Black, which is even greater. It's in color, it's thick. The story can go on and on, but let's take it all the way back. How did you get interested in telling your stories, chronicling this history?
Well, people often ask me how I became interested in African Americans in the movies, and it really goes back to a sort of childhood passion. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and as a kid I saw a lot of television, a lot. And as a kid I suffered from asthma, and my darling mother did everything she could to get treatments for me. Tried to keep me entertained when I couldn't go outside. And so my great friend did become the television set. And I would look at TV when I couldn't go out, and I was fascinated by old movies. And when I say old movies, I mean old movies. Some people today, when they think about old movies, they're thinking about the 80s or 90s. But I like the real old classic films from, say, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. And so as a kid, I would watch these old movies, and in some of them, you would see a black performer come on. It might be the Shirley Temple movies, and you might see Bill Bojangles Robinson, this great dancer who was by little Shirley's side. Or it might be Eddie Rochester Anderson with Jack Benny. Or it might be Hattie McDaniel in Gone with the Wind with Scarlett O'Hara. And when I saw these movies, I always looked at these black performers who would do a scene or two and then they'd disappear. And I always said to myself, where do they go? What do they do when they leave? And so I began even then to sort of begin to gather these images of these early performers who came in for a scene or two and who often would steal the movie itself. So that was the beginning, a childhood passion. And I went to the movies a lot when I could. And the first black movie that I saw that I can recall, I didn't see it when it first came out, but I saw it later and I'd heard about it, was the movie Carmen Jones. And Carmen Jones was a black cast film, and in it, at its center, there was Dorothy Dandridge. And Dorothy Dandridge, I mean, everyone, you just looked at her and you followed her throughout the whole movie. Now, there was an interesting sequence in Carmen Jones that even as a kid, I understood something extraordinary was happening in that movie. If you see it again, there's a nightclub sequence. It's a roadside cafe. And Carmen Jones, played by Dorothy, is in this cafe. And there are all these other people there too. Pearl Bailey is in it, Diane Carroll, Roy Glenn. And in this sequence, you see people dancing at one point. And there is a drummer. And the drummer is Max Roach. And they are shouting, "Go Max, go Max." Among the dancers there is the young Alvin Ailey. Before he began to choreograph and established his troupe. There was also Carmen de Lavalade. If you see it again, she's the one with the long ponytail. And there was Archie Savage, who had danced with the Katherine Dunham dance troupe. Well, the great thing about this sequence in Carmen Jones, and it's a great thing when you do see black actors and actresses really working together, the energy level was so great. It was almost as if the screen could not contain them. These were people who were coming on. Most of them may have felt they weren't going to get another chance like this in the movies. And its director, Otto Preminger, let them go with their talents. That was the first one. And of course, I was fascinated by Dandridge and the legend of Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge, with all of her talent, all of her beauty, all of her skills, had ended up quite tragically. And it was in part because of the movie industry itself. They didn't quite have a place for Dorothy Dandridge. She had become the first African American to be nominated for an Oscar in a leading role character, not supporting. Hattie McDaniel had won for supporting role. Dandridge was the first in a leading role, male or female. With all of that, there was not a great follow-up film for her. And she'd ended up dead at the age of 42 from an overdose of an antidepressant pill. Well, hearing the story of Dandridge and seeing these films, knowing Carmen Jones, I then was really hooked on learning more and perhaps one day telling a story about this history. What's interesting is that my very first job, my full job, rather than a summer job, was working for the director of Carmen Jones, Otto Preminger. Otto Preminger had also directed another black film, Porgy and Bess, with Dorothy Dandridge and with Sidney Poitier, and he had directed a film called Hurry Sundown, which was really a white film with a racial theme in it. Diane Carroll was in it, Thea Richards was in it, and Robert Hooks. Well, I got this job with Otto Preminger, and this was really how I learned about the industry. I was very young, and I was very naive, and I can remember the very first day, at the end of the day, Otto Preminger had his assistants come into his office. He had a massive desk. And Preminger himself, if you Google, you can see pictures. He had a huge head. And he was bald. And this is before baldness was fashionable for men. And sometimes he'd be in the office and he would have an electric razor and he'd be shaving his head. Well, that first day when Preminger had his assistants in, he said, and he was from Austria and he had a thick accent. I can't get the accent quite right. But he said to me, "Well, Mr. Bogle, do you have any questions?" And you know what I asked him? I said, "Mr. Preminger, can you tell me about Dorothy Dandridge?" Otto Preminger was taken aback, but he did answer some questions. He told me he was convinced she had taken her life. He told me that she was a great talent. And what he even had not understood at the time of her rise was that the industry was going to block her in so many ways. So that was another step for me. And then I began to seriously look at films. I went to the Library of Congress to see old movies. I met with film collectors to see films. I went through every issue of Ebony magazine, every issue, to see how black films have been covered by this black publication. I began to amass the images, and then I was able to get a contract with a publisher. Now, don't ask me how I did it, but I did. I got a contract, they gave me an advance, and this was how it was starting. Tom's Coons was a great adventure for me. It was a kind of odyssey. I was off to discover more, not only about movies, but myself. And I kept asking myself, can you pull this off? Can you write this book? I met many people when I was working on Tom's Coons. I met the great director King Vidor, a white director, who directed a film called Hallelujah in 1929, a black film that his studio, MGM, had not wanted him to make, but he did, and he took great pride in it. King Vidor shared his memories with me and so many others. I got Tom's Coons done. It was well received. The funny thing about Tom's Coons was that Tom's Coons, after the hardback issue, it was released in a paperback edition. The paperback edition, and there's some still around on the collector's market, they go for a big price. It was this small book that had all the photographs of the original. And this little paperback, this was the days of the really mass paperbacks. Bantam had published it, and they got that book everywhere. Tom's Coons was in airports. Tom's Coons was in the casinos in Vegas. Tom's Coons was in restaurants. Tom's Coons was, well, the equivalent of the dollar stores today, Woolworths, the 5 and 10. And Tom's Coons sold. But the interesting thing for me was after that, I said to myself, what's going to become of me? Is there a place for me in the scheme of things? Because at this time, to really be writing about black popular culture and to be writing about black films, it wasn't something that was frequently done. And as I asked myself if there was a place for me, I said to myself one day, you're going to have to make a place for yourself. And then I continued writing. I did another book called Brown Sugar, which was over 100 years of America's black female superstars. This was a book that originally went from the days of Bessie Smith, the blues singer, Ma Rainey, through Billie Holiday, through Lena Horne and others, and it's been reissued and updated, and it now comes up to Beyonce. So I had done that, but it was repeatedly working and working to do the next thing, to get the next advance, and to make sure that people knew about the book, and to get them to read it, and then to move forward. But that's how it started.
I love it, yeah. So Tom's Coons was the history. What basically, how, this is a beautiful book, and such care is taken into it. I noticed in the front, the very first image is Dorothy Dandridge and
Yes.
Harry Belafonte. So I know this is a hands-on project for you. How long did it take to put this together with TCM, and how is this different from all the other work that you've done prior to this?
Well, you know, Tom's Coons, which is now, I updated Tom's Coons about 2 years ago. It's in its 5th edition. Tom's Coons comes up to 12 Years a Slave and Django Unchained and so forth. But what happened, I had appeared on Turner Classic Movies. I had done a series for them a few years ago of 38 films, and it was called Race and Hollywood. And through the films, and I co-hosted with Robert Osborne, who no longer is living, and I tracked this history through films, from Birth of a Nation, a shocking film. And if any of you have seen it, you won't quite believe how blatant its racism is. But we went through Birth of a Nation to other films like the original Imitation of Life. I don't know if many of you have seen the first Imitation of Life, the light-skinned young black woman who wants to pass for white and breaks her mother's heart. The original one in 1934, the light-skinned black woman was played by a real black actress, Freddie Washington. And the thing about Imitation of Life, in the original, they took it out of the second. The black mother has a pancake recipe, and she gives the recipe to her white friend. Her white friend then markets a pancake mix based on that recipe. The white woman makes a fortune. And at one point, she goes to the black woman and offers her a 20% interest in the company. Of course, it's very kind of the white woman, particularly since without the black woman, there would have been no company at all. But the black mother is made to say she doesn't want any money. She doesn't want a house of her own. All she wants to do is to take care of her good white friend. That first imitation of life sends out certain messages. And the daughter is rebellious and rebels against her mother's submissiveness. I interviewed Freddie Washington, who played the daughter. And Freddie Washington told me, she said there was one line in Imitation of Life that she absolutely hated. She said it was a line where she had to look in the mirror, and her mother was asking her what did she want. And she had to say that she wanted to be white. And Freddie Washington felt very strongly, she said, and she told the director, John Stahl, she said, it's not that she wants to be white for the sake of whiteness. It's that she wants white opportunities and a chance at life. The director would not change the line, but he told Freddie Washington, if that's the way you feel, then play it that way. You can still see that first Imitation of Life, and you can see Freddie Washington's tensions, and you can see the part played by Louise Beavers, her mother, her tensions as well. Well, that was the series that I did for Turner Classic Movies. We did 38 films tracing it. It became an award winner. Turner Classic Movies had me back on, and then, I don't know if any of you saw this summer, I did a series with Ben Mankiewicz on slavery in the movies. And I traced the way that slavery had been depicted in the movies. From Gone with the Wind, where basically everybody's very happy to wait on Miss Scarlet, and came through to a movie called Tamango with Dorothy Dandridge about a slave ship revolt, and also a film that's pretty hard to take called Mandingo. And Mandingo is a film that really inspired Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained. It shows the horrors and the brutalities of slavery. And at times it becomes too much. You really don't want to watch it. But it gets at that really hate-filled time. Nonetheless, I did that series, Slavery in the Movies, I did others, and then Turner Classic Movies said to me, we'd like you to do a book for us. And if you do a book for us, what is it you want to do? So I came up with the idea of Hollywood Black. And the thing was that what I wanted to do with Hollywood Black, which is different from Tom's Coons, I wanted to compile a series of really striking visuals. And if you can look through this, if you look through this book, you're not going to see another book like it that really captures the black movie-going experience. So I started work on it, and I really had to hunt for the photographs. And what's interesting, which people don't realize, is that sometimes on a movie set, when actors and actresses do a scene, they will have a photographer come in and photograph something, the scene that's been done. And in the old films, they often didn't photograph the black actors and actresses. Or when they did, it was very limited, the number of the ones that they, the pictures that they took. And then later, those pictures just disappeared. So for me, it was finding many of these old photographs and bringing them to light so people could see them. The other thing with this book, which really got me, and remember, I've written about black movie history before, was that after Birth of a Nation, this movie in 1915, in which black men are depicted as would-be rapists and in pursuit of power and lusting for white women. Birth of a Nation was a shocker. The NAACP protested against it. And then what's very interesting is that there were others within the African American community who decided to make their own movies. And this is something that's been lost to us in history. Birth of a Nation was 1915. Within a year, 1916, there was a black actor named Noble Johnson who, with his brother George and others, formed the Lincoln Motion Picture Company, a company to make black films for black audiences. Shortly after that, Oscar Micheaux, this pioneering African-American writer, director, producer, began making movies. So what was interesting, and you'll see it in the book, the chronological order in which the book goes, is that black filmmakers got there very early, and they were on the case. But making movies was always hard. First of all, you had to get the money to make the films, as you know, Mike. Once you make the film, you've got to get it distributed. You've got to publicize it. You've got to get it into movie theaters. The movie studios, MGM, Paramount, 20th Century Fox, and the others, they all had their own distribution system. And many of the movie companies, for a long time, owned their own theaters. So they could show the films in theaters that were right there. They didn't have to hustle around to find a theater to exhibit these movies. So this was the other thing in Hollywood Black, to show these early filmmakers that came on the scene and then to follow through and to see a real transition that came about, and this may surprise people, when sound movies came in. Most of you know that movies in the beginning were silent, but sound came in the late 1920s. And sound movies demanded a new kind of realism. They couldn't be these sort of dreamy kind of films of the past. And in the past, particularly in something like Birth of a Nation, you'll see that important black characters were played by whites in blackface. They didn't think black people could even play themselves in the movies. But sound came in, it demanded a new realism, and then you got real black actors and actresses coming on the screen and working and making names for themselves, more often than not, in playing stereotyped roles. The actors were often good. Paul Robeson was great, if you see him in Showboat, singing Old Man River. Hattie McDaniel, despite Gone with the Wind, she's got attitude throughout that film. She does not want to wait so much on Ms. Scarlett. And Hattie McDaniel has a big sonic boom of a voice. When you hear Hattie McDaniel speak, you know she was born to give orders, not to take them. McDaniel ended up winning that Oscar as Best Supporting Actress. And what's interesting about Hattie McDaniel, this great performance in this film, when Gone with the Wind opened in Atlanta, they would not even let her attend the opening. The night of the Academy Awards, when she won, she could not be seated at the table with the white producer and the white stars of the film. They really segregated her and her escort, but she won that Oscar. I also show in this book how movies change in the 40s with World War II. And it indicates to us, and we want to keep this in mind because it influences the movies that we see today, how the social, political atmosphere in a country can bring about a change in images. World War II came, and many felt that black GIs were going abroad to fight for the freedom of others. And when they would come home, they were going to ask themselves about the freedoms they were denied in their own country. Now, what's interesting is that one of the changes in the movies in the 40s, and we may not realize how significant it was the arrival of Lena Horne. Lena Horne came to the movies. She did not play a maid. She usually came on, sang a song or two, disappeared from the movie. It was her great disappointment she did not get to play many roles. She does two, one in Cabin in the Sky, one in Stormy Weather. But the interesting thing about Lena Horne, the studio took all sorts of efforts to photograph her in the right way, to make her up in the right way. The makeup they devised for her proved to be all wrong. It was too dark. Lena Horne said they could only use it on white women who were playing mulattoes. It wouldn't work with black women. But with all of that, there was something else that went on at MGM where Lena Horne was signed that really made Lena Horne bitter in later years. I interviewed Sidney Gilleroff, the great hair stylist at MGM. He devised the hairstyles for all of these great leading ladies, from Greta Garbo to Ava Gardner to Elizabeth Taylor to Judy Garland, Lana Turner, the works. He devised the hairstyle for Lena Horne in her MGM movies. Sidney Gilleroff said to me, "You know, Donald, none of the hairdressers at MGM would touch Lena Horne's hair. They didn't want to go anywhere near her hair." Sidney Gilleroff then did something that he knew he had to do. He hired black hairdressers to work on the set. And then you have the whole thing of unions and guilds in Hollywood, but he brought in the black hairdressers to work with Lena Horne. Lena Horne never forgot that with Sidney Gilleroff. And also Gilleroff himself sometimes would go to the set and tend to her hair. He couldn't go there every day. But these were pressures within the studio that these people had. In 1950, when Ruby Dee went to Hollywood to do the movie No Way Out, which starred Sidney Poitier and Richard Widmark, a white actor, and a movie that dealt with racism, Ruby Dee, bless her heart, she told me that she went to the director, Joe Mankiewicz, the Uncle Ben Mankiewicz, who's on Turner Classic Movies, and she said she didn't know you weren't supposed to do this, but she went to the director and she said, "Well, you know, can you get somebody in here to do my hair? These people don't know anything about my hair." And she told me she didn't realize you're not supposed to go to the director with something like that. You go to someone else. But she said Mankiewicz listened to her. So this problem was still there with makeup, hair, aside from the parts that people would get. Dandridge and Poitier brought about the real change, and I have great pictures of Poitier in this book when he was very young. And also, the book tells the story of two great scenes in one of Poitier's movies. Now, Poitier, in many films, was the good Negro. He was there, the way the scripts were written, to help his white friend. Sidney was always good, but he didn't write his scripts. But in the movie In the Heat of the Night, an Academy Award-winning film, Poitier had two significant scenes that he never forgot. One scene, he plays a detective who's come from the north to the south. He's helping a bigoted white sheriff solve a murder. The sheriff is played by Rod Steiger, who won the Oscar and who's very good. But the sheriff is talking to Poitier's character. Poitier's character's name is Virgil Tibbs. And the sheriff calls him boy and uses the N-word, and he says to Poitier, "What do they call you when you're up north?" And Poitier says, "They call me
Mr.
Tibbs."
From Philadelphia. Mr. Tibbs from Philadelphia.
Yes, from Philadelphia. And the interesting thing is, this was 1967, and America was changing, and young black America was changing, and people cheered him in movie theaters. He had another scene in The Heat of the Night where there's another bigoted older white man who feels Poitier is uppity, and he slaps Poitier, and Poitier slaps him back. He just about knocks him to the floor. Now, Sidney has said, and there's been a debate about this, he has said that originally in that script, one of those drafts, he was not supposed to slap back. But Poitier said, "No, this cannot happen." He cannot sit here and take it. The director, Norman Jewison, has said that they did have it originally in the script. My feeling is that probably in the early draft, it wasn't. Some writer came in and changed it. But these are moments when we go to the movies, even when there are things we don't like, there are these things that excite us. The book follows through with that, and it follows through with the era of blaxploitation, when now other black film directors, Melvin Van Peebles, Gordon Parks, a great photographer from Life magazine, comes in. He directs The Learning Tree, and then he does Shaft. Shaft, who bops down the street to Isaac Hayes' music. Shaft, he's a bad mother.
Shut your mouth.
And the thing is that this
Shaft.
is, yes, I'm talking about Shaft. Who's the cat who won't cop out when there's danger all about?
Shaft.
Shaft.
Can you dig
If
it?
you
Right on.
if you see Shaft and you note the opening of Shaft, now it's directed by Gordon Parks, black director. At the opening of Shaft, it's in Times Square, New York. Shaft is coming up from the subway. It's the black man coming from underground, coming up into this other world. He walks against traffic and almost dares them to hit him. And this resilience, this assertiveness, this self-empowerment of this black hero, quite different from Stepin Fetchit with his yes. And Fetchit was a talented actor, but he didn't get to do anything else in most of his films. Richard Roundtree is Shaft, and of course the Shaft franchise lives on. We now have the new one. I like Sam Jackson, but he's not Richard Roundtree. He's not. He's not. But these directors came on the scene, and this raised hope again for audiences and a young audience going to the movies at that particular time. It's coming out of the restless 60s. In the 60s, the civil rights movement had evolved into the Black Power movement. Say it loud. I'm black, I'm proud. Black is beautiful. And blaxploitation, for all the problems in those movies, there are problems. We look at the depictions of women in those films. Nonetheless, there is this idea that the black hero's day has come. The book follows through. You're going to see a great picture of an actor who is not as well thought of today as he should be, but he made history for his role in the 1982 film An Officer and a Gentleman. Does anyone know who I'm talking about? Louis Gossett Jr. He won an Oscar. We don't hear much about him today. He also was, of course, on TV. He was Fiddler in Roots. And Fiddler, the one who played the fiddle for the whites and clowned, but when he was away from them, he told Kunta Kinte, let them call you Toby. You're going to have to do that to survive, but you'll always be Kunta Kinte to us. There's a great picture of Lou Gossett in the book, and we follow through. And what's very interesting is that when we get to the new millennium today, there is so much talk about the Academy Awards. There's Lou. Isn't that a great picture? There is so much talk about the Oscars, but what's interesting is that in the new millennium, before the Oscars so white hashtag, more African Americans had been nominated for the Oscar or who have won the Oscar than any time before in history. Will Smith got Oscar nominations. Jamie Foxx won for playing Ray Charles. Forrest Whitaker won for playing Idi Amin. Jennifer Hudson won for Dreamgirls. Octavia Spencer won for The Help, that poor film. But anyway, we had all of these people, and The Help is a good example. It's a little bit like Green Book. The Help and Green Book are very entertaining movies, very entertaining. And that's a problem, because if you pull back and see what's happening, if you see Green Book, look at it again. There's a black character played quite well by Mahershala Ali, who deserved his Oscar. There's a white character. The movie establishes the white character's life. We see him in the beginning with his wife. We know he's got a racial problem. All of this. He ends up befriending this black man. And it's really a white man's redemption movie. Same thing happened in Monsters Ball with poor Halle Berry and with Billy Bob Thornton, who also is this racist who redeems himself by helping this poor black woman who's left sort of stranded and alone. But nonetheless, we had more Oscar winners than ever before in history. But there was still a problem. And the problem was that the people voting for the Oscars, it was not a level playing field. The Los Angeles Times, and you can read about it in the book, they looked at the membership of the Academy, the people who vote for Oscars, and the Academy doesn't like to give out that information. A large percentage of them were older white men. There were not as many women, and certainly there were not people of color, diversity, and then the whole thing, it was reconfigured, and they brought in new people, and this may explain why some filmmakers are now getting more attention. Black filmmakers, 12 Years a Slave, directed by Steve McQueen, won the Best Oscar that year. Moonlight, directed by Barry Jenkins, won an Oscar. So we get to see something else happening, but we don't want to think, even though today it is so exciting to see these filmmakers and actors and actresses, someone like Denzel Washington. Denzel can basically call the shots for himself in Hollywood now. He has that kind of clout. He wanted to film Fences, the August Wilson play, and he got to do it. And not only did he get to do it, but you see that Viola Davis got to win an Oscar for playing the role. You compare that to a movie like A Raisin in the Sun. The movie version came out in '61. If any of you see that film, I think it's Poitier's finest performance. You've got Ruby Dee, you've got Claudia McNeil, you've got Diana Sands as Beneatha, the kid's sister who sees her roots in Africa. You have all of these great performances. Not one person in A Raisin in the Sun was nominated for the Oscar. Not one. Not even Sidney Poitier. And it was a great injustice. So today things have changed in that respect, but we can't sit back and think that it's all going to be perfect. Because we've seen significant times happen before, and then we've seen things peter out. So we just have to stay on the case, and we have to think about the films that we support. Right. All of this is in Hollywood Black. The stars, the films, the filmmakers.
So,
thank you,
Donald. Great stump speech. All right, I'll give you the ta-da. That's the emotion for Donald's presentation. Sammy.
Well, don't show Sammy.
Why? Love Sammy. Stop it. This is a celebration, and on these images in here, I mean, I think images, there's a reason why people in certain cultures don't want to be photographed, because it does capture a spirit, and I think this book is amazing for that, and that's why I encourage people to get extra copies.
That does get Sammy's spirit. It does. That picture.
I'm gonna take. I just sometimes, I'll read the words and then just stare at the picture. So I love you for that. 3 questions. I don't know if Vanessa's, if there are questions for people. All right. So we have questions coming, but so just for the record, I mean, do you make a definition of black film, or is it just the performers and what the representation?
Well, I do think that a black film basically is a film that's got a black director and probably a black writer. The writer is very important. But I do think there are other films where we get a black cast, and a black cast film. Raisin in the Sun did not have a black director. Mm-hmm. It had a black writer, Lorraine Hansberry, who had written the play and who did the screenplay. So, it varies, but we still do want to see the filmmakers themselves black filmmakers get to tell the story.
So now, I mean, this is perfect timing for this book to come out, because we are on the cusp of the next wave, whatever it is, how long it's going to last. Is it at this, from your knowledge and knowing all the stories, is this about justice or representation? This access into Hollywood, into the Hollywood system. What do you see the next level of this story, this journey?
Well, I think the next level, I mean, we do want more black filmmakers. And it's interesting because with the book, I use African American, but I also use black because what's interesting, if you look at Lupita Nyong'o, who won an Oscar for 12 Years a Slave, technically she's not African American. And Chiwetel Ejiofor, who's also plays the lead in 12 Years a Slave, he's British and he's of Nigerian descent. So, but we do get now to see this, there is a kind of energy there, and there is this, there's a kind of group philosophy developing in Hollywood now within the black community, that this is a chance for us to do films, let's do them, let's try to be true to ourselves, and also a variety of films, because that's very important. You may have a movie like 12 Years a Slave, but you also have a movie like Night School with Kevin Hart. I'll tell you something, Kevin Hart's from Philadelphia. The director of that is Malcolm Lee. And I went to see that with Kevin Hart and Tiffany Haddish. And I wasn't excited about seeing it, but I thought that he came across well in that. He was different from the way I'd seen him in other films. But the thing is, we do need a range, and we do know those filmmakers. No, not that one. That's based. No.
Well, Donald, we want to get the audience involved in this conversation, and I know that you have to get a train, so we only have time for a few questions. TMC does Black History Month films, and they repeat the same films over and over again. What do you suggest they do?
Well, the thing is that they need, I mean, they are trying. I don't know if any of you have been looking at The Essentials with Ava DuVernay, and they just showed the other night Losing Ground by Kathleen Collins, a black film maker, and that's in the book as well. And they showed some other films that have not often been seen. But it is, it's a search, and also to look for more of the independent films done by black filmmakers shot outside of Hollywood. So that's the thing that they're going to have to do. And as I said, when I did the series on slavery, they had never shown Tamango, which I felt was important about a slave revolt. And they had never shown Mandingo. And when I gave them the list, and some things they can't get, but they came back to me and they said that they got Mandingo, and they were showing it. And then I looked at Mandingo again. I said, "Oh my God, what have I done? How are they going to show this on television?" They showed it late at night, but they did put it there so people could see it. So it's an effort, and I think that they're in a new day now where they do want to do more. Let's hope they will.
And
but
people
again,
can write in if you want to make change, and they know that there's an audience out there. Someone wanted to know, what is your favorite all-time black film?
Well, the two films, I mean, there are many that mean a lot to me. One that really, because it was that early film, Carmen Jones, means a lot. The other is Boys in the Hood. That Boys in the Hood is a that film came out in '91. It is 28 years old, and it still resonates. I mean, it's a very, very powerful film, and I show it to my students at Penn and at NYU. And what's interesting with that, because they see all sorts of films, and when they get to Boys in the Hood, that one seems like today to them, because the problems that are in that film for those characters, it's not like society has changed and those things have disappeared. So that one for me I still find it moving. And there's the scene, for those of you who've seen it, when they bring Ricky's body back home. And I don't feel the film that logically sort of works. It seems like they take him to a hospital or something, but they bring him home, and dramatically it works. And the whole family is affected. Ricky's mother doughboy, and so you get all of these emotions in that. And John Singleton told me that Steven Spielberg said to him when he saw that scene and all those emotions, Spielberg told John, that's the room you don't want to be in. That the emotions are just too intense and too heavy.
Can you speak on Singleton writing your forward?
Yeah, well, the great thing about John, I knew him. I really didn't know him well, and when the book was done, they asked me who I wanted to write the foreword, and I gave them a list of 5 people. John was number 2. I intentionally put him number 2, but he was who I wanted.
Who were the other 2?
I'm not going to get into that.
Okay.
So, but he
Give
was
us some scoop. Come on.
He was the only one they contacted, and then I was hearing that he wants to talk to you, and I said, well, tell him how he can reach me, and I wasn't hearing anything, and then it was like, he expected me to contact him, and no one gave me any information, and then I realized he had given me before his cell number and his private email, and so I called him, and he said, I've been waiting for you to call, and he was concerned about the deadline, and so he said, I've got some of it. I'm going to send it to you right now. And so he said, read it. And so then, I got it. And then he said to me, just like a director, he said, start editing, because we did have that deadline. But he was great to work with. And the thing about John Singleton that I really liked, among many things, he not only liked making movies, but he liked watching movies. He was a real moviegoer. And he talked about a lot of things. As a matter of fact, he was talking about a particular actress. And he said, she's in the book, right? And I said, yes. And we had sent him a PDF of the book. But her picture wasn't in. And I had told the designer, why isn't her picture here? And we've got to get this picture. So I had to explain to him that this actress he really seemed to like, that her picture would be in the book. His idols were Spike Lee and Gordon Parks. He really liked Gordon Parks, and he wanted to write more about Gordon Parks. And I said, John, we just don't have the space. I said, why didn't you save that for your autobiography? And he said, all right. And of course, it's not going to be an autobiography now. So. Well,
here is the final question, because we really enjoyed this evening. What's your next project? Now, if he answers this, I'm going to be surprised, okay?
Well, I'm not going to surprise you. I don't say anything. I'm superstitious, and because this book, I don't think any family members knew about it till it was really done, and so I find it best I find it best not to say anything till it's finished.
Well, thank you so much, and I can't impress upon everyone here that his knowledge and the information that he shared with us is really priceless. Just before we close up, I'm just curious, and I'm sure Donald is also, just shout out some of your favorite African-American films.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What is that? Yes. Yes.
Well, one of my favorites, and it's not an African-American movie, but Gone with the Wind. And as they say, frankly...
You don't give it. Yes.
At any rate, thank you so much. This project was presented to support the African-American Children's Book Project, and he can't do another project unless you continue to buy his books. Sounds very commercial, but in publishing, it's a business, and we're so grateful that you took time, because you're fabulous, and you're still coming down here.
So remember, Hollywood Black, the stars, the films, the filmmakers.
And thank you so much, Michael. Donald is going to walk, and he will be signing copies of his books. And again, thank you so much, the Bynums and all their team here at